You will repaint that door to an approved color by Friday, or we will paint it for you, and you will be billed for our time." That was the voice on my porch on a Tuesday morning in March. And the woman who said it was Diane Vasquez, president of the Stone Ridge Vista Homeowners Association for the last 6 years. The door she was threatening belonged to the house my wife Rosa and I built with our own hands on 4.5 acres at the edge of the development. And the color she hated was the deep barn red Rosa had chosen the spring before the cancer took her. What Diane did not know, standing on my steps in her white blazer and her sunglasses pushed up into a bob that never moved, was that the paint on that door, the paint in the cans her contractor would later open, the paint coating half the homes in her tidy little kingdom, all of it ran through a warehouse with my name on the deed. So tell me, if someone threatened to deface the last thing the person you loved ever touched, and you happened to own the supply chain they were about to use to do it, what would you have done? My name is Walter Boone. I am 61 years old, and for 34 years I ran a regional coatings and paint distribution company out of a metal building off the county highway. The kind of business nobody thinks about until the contractor says the order is in. We supplied paint, primer, stain, and industrial coating to half the builders in 3 counties. And I knew the chemistry of every gallon we moved the way a baker knows flour. I sold the operating side of the company 2 years ago, but I kept the warehouse, the records, and a quiet stake in the distribution arm, because a man does not walk away clean from the thing he built. Rosa and I bought our acreage in 1994, when Stone Ridge Vista was nothing but a cattle lease and a gravel road. We built the house over 4 summers. She picked the trim, the tile, the iron numbers by the door. And the year before she died, she repainted the front door that barn red with a brush. Slow, because her hands had started to shake by then. The development grew up around us like a tide that never quite reached the porch. Vinyl-sided houses, beige and gray and taupe, marched up the old pasture in rows, and somewhere along the way, a homeowners association formed to keep them all the same. My parcel had been carved out and platted before any of it, with its own deeded access and its own separate legal description. And the developer who sold those lots had been a man I knew. A fellow named Hal Cutter, who shook my hand at his own kitchen table and told me my land was never inside the association and never would be. He drew it for me on a paper napkin, the line where his subdivision stopped and my 4.5 acres began. And he said, "Walt, your dirt was here before any of this, and it answers to nobody but you." I kept that napkin for years before I had the real survey. I had the paper that said so. I had filed it, indexed it, kept a copy in a labeled folder in the steel cabinet in my office. Because keeping records is not a hobby for me. It is the closest thing I have to a religion. I learned that discipline in the paint business, where a wrong record costs real money. When a builder orders 400 gallons of a custom tint for a job and the batch comes back off by a shade, the only thing that saves you is the paper, the formula on file, the lot number, the signed approval. I kept those files for 34 years, and I never lost an argument I had documented. Rosa used to laugh at me for it. She said I would file the grocery receipts if she let me. She was not entirely wrong. She also understood it, though, because she came from people who kept things. Her grandmother's recipe box, her father's tools, the deed to a farm in the next county that had stayed in the family because somebody, generations back, had walked the boundary and written down where the corners were. Rosa believed that a thing you could prove was a thing nobody could take. And she was right. And the proving is the whole story I am telling you. The house itself was the best record we ever kept of who we were. I poured the footings the first summer, and Rosa hauled block alongside me until her hands blistered. The second summer, we framed it. The third, we closed it in and ran the wire and the plumbing. Both of us learning as we went, both of us cussing the same crooked stud at the same time. The fourth summer was the finish work, and that was Rosa's summer, because the bones were mine, but the skin was hers. She picked the trim color and the tile in the entry and the iron numbers by the door, hand-forged, ordered from a smith 3 counties over because the hardware store numbers were not good enough for the house we had bled into. She picked the barn red for the door last of all, the spring before she got sick, and she painted it herself with a 4-inch brush, slow and even, stopping to rest her arm, because by then the tremor had started and she would not let me take the brush. She said it was her door to paint. I held the can. That is the door Diane Vasquez told me to repaint to an approved color by Friday. Diane came into power the way these people always do, by being the only one who wanted the job badly enough. She drove a pearl-white SUV with a vanity plate, wore a blazer to walk the sidewalks, and carried a clipboard the way a sheriff carries a sidearm. I had nodded at her over the years. I had not thought much about her. That changed the morning she stood on my steps and told me my front door was a violation. I told her, calm as I could, that my property was not part of her association and never had been. I told her I had the deed and the plat to prove it, and that she was welcome to look at them anytime she liked. She smiled the way a person smiles when they have already decided not to hear you. She tucked the clipboard against her hip and tipped her head. "Mr. Boone," she said, "I understand you've been out here a long time. This parcel, though, is functionally part of our community. Your door is visible from Vista Ridge Lane. Standards are standards. We can't have one property setting a tone the rest of us have to live down to." I said it again, slower. I said the parcel had its own deed, its own access, and that it had been platted separate before her subdivision existed. I said she could read it for herself. I'll have our attorney follow up," she said, which is what people say when they have not read a single page and do not intend to. "Friday, Mr. Boone. An approved color by Friday." Then she clicked down my gravel in shoes meant for tile, the kitten heels turning on the loose stone, and she got into the pearl-white SUV with the vanity plate and drove away toward the rows of beige houses she actually had a say over. I stood on the porch a minute after the dust settled. The barn red door was warm where the morning sun hit it. I put my hand flat against it, the way I sometimes did without thinking. And then I went inside and I wrote it down. Date, time, what was said, word for word as best I could remember it, the make of the vehicle and the plate. I started a fresh manila folder and I labeled it with her name in block letters. I want you to notice that. The first thing I did was not get angry. The first thing I did was open a folder. Friday came. I was at the kitchen table with my coffee when I heard tires on the gravel. And through the window, I watched a white work van pull up to my gate with a magnetic sign on the door for a company called Clean Line Property Services. 2 men got out. One carried a roller and a tray. The other carried a 5-gallon bucket and a clipboard. And behind them, parked on the county road where she thought the line was, sat Diane's pearl SUV. I walked out onto the porch with my phone already recording. "This is private property outside the association," I said. "You are not authorized to paint anything here." The man with the clipboard did not even look up. He said he had a work order from the HOA, that the homeowner had been notified, and that he was just doing his job. Then he and the other man set up at my gate, opened the bucket, and with a 4-inch brush they painted a wide gray stripe and the word "Notice" across the face of my barn red door. Rosa's door. They painted it like they were crossing out a mistake. I did not shout. I want to be honest about that, because the not shouting is the whole point. I stood on my own porch and I filmed every second. The van, the plate, the magnetic sign, the bucket, the brand stamped on the side of that bucket, and Diane watching from the road with her arms crossed and a small, satisfied tilt to her chin. When they were done, they handed me an invoice for $240 for the service, got in the van, and left. That was incident number 1, formally counted, filed that night with the video backed up to 2 drives. Here's the thing they did not understand. I had stood close enough to read the bucket. It was a 5-gallon pail of exterior acrylic in a color the industry calls pewter mist. And I knew that paint. I knew the run. I knew the distributor, because the distributor was the arm of the company I still held a stake in. And Clean Line Property Services was on our account list. They bought their paint from me. Every gallon that had defaced my wife's door had crossed my own warehouse floor. My daughter Lena was 16 that spring. She had come to live with me full-time after Rosa passed, and she had her mother's stubbornness and her mother's eye for when a thing was wrong. She came home from school that afternoon on the bus that stopped at the end of the county road, walked up the drive, and stopped dead in the gravel when she saw the gray slash across the door. She stood very still with her backpack still on one shoulder, the way you stand when something you thought was solid turns out not to be. She did not cry. She set the backpack down in the dirt, and she walked up to the door and put 2 fingers against the wet edge of the gray. And they came away pewter, and she looked at them a long time. "Who did this?" she said, not loud. Flat the way her mother got when she was past loud. I told her the HOA, the van, the woman on the road. I told her they had handed me a bill for it. Lena wiped her fingers on her jeans, and she looked at the door. And then she looked at me, and she said one word. She said, "Document." That was Rosa in her. Plain as day, the same single syllable Rosa would have used. We took the door off its hinges that evening, the 2 of us working the pins out with a punch and a hammer. And we carried it into the garage and laid it across 2 sawhorses and photographed it under the good shop light from every angle, the brush strokes, the drips, the way someone had dragged the word across the grain like crossing out a name on a list. Then we hung a sheet of plywood in the opening so the house would not stand open to the road. And I told Lena we were not going to be in a hurry about any of it. Hurry is how you lose. She nodded like she already knew that. And maybe she did. The next Monday, I drove to the county clerk's office and pulled the recorded plat for the whole development, every page, and the recorded covenants for the Stone Ridge Vista Homeowners Association. I read them at the counter with a pencil. The covenants applied to lots within the platted subdivision, described by lot and block number. My parcel was not a lot in the subdivision. It carried its own meets and bounds description and predated the plat by a decade. The association had no more jurisdiction over my door than it had over the moon. I made certified copies of everything, and I added them to the folder. I also did something quieter. I went back to my warehouse on a Saturday morning, unlocked the side door, and sat down at the old account terminal in the office that still smelled like solvent and cardboard after all these years. The screen was the same green-on-black system I had run the business on for 2 decades, and the operating company had never bothered to migrate the old purchasing records off it. I pulled the purchasing history for Clean Line Property Services. They were a steady account, 3 years running, and they bought in volume, far more volume than a small property maintenance outfit should need. They bought primer and exterior acrylic by the pallet, not the gallon. A company that paints a fence here and a mailbox post there does not move 40 gallons of pewter mist in a quarter. A company painting a whole neighborhood does. They bought it on a contractor discount tied to a builder code, the kind we issued to developers who were doing volume across many addresses. And the builder code on their account was registered to a development company called Vista Ridge Holdings. I sat there a long time looking at that name on the green screen, the cursor blinking after it, Because the registered agent for Vista Ridge Holdings, listed right there in the account contact field where my own clerk had typed it 3 years back, was a man named Greg Vasquez, Diane's husband. I want to be careful here about what I knew and when. At that moment, I did not have a scheme. I had a coincidence and a bad feeling and a screen full of invoices. A man who has read 10,000 invoices, though, learns that volume tells a story, and the volume on the Clean Line account did not match a company that mowed lawns and painted the occasional fence. It matched a company buying enough exterior coating to paint a whole neighborhood, over and over, on a developer's dime. So I printed the purchasing history, every line, and I started a second folder, and I labeled that one Vista Ridge. The notices kept coming, and they climbed. The second incident was a stack of fines, mailed to my house in a thick envelope. $1,100 in penalties for an unapproved exterior color, a non-compliant gate, an unpermitted outbuilding that was actually my late wife's greenhouse, and failure to submit to a compliance walkthrough. I filed all of it. I did not pay a cent. That was incident 2, and the running total in the folder was 2. The third incident came on a Wednesday afternoon when a man in a polo shirt and a lanyard showed up at my gate claiming to be a county code inspector. He had a clipboard and a laminated badge on a clip, and he stood at the gap in the fence where the gate hung and called up to the house that he was there to inspect my outbuilding for permit compliance. I came down with my phone in my shirt pocket recording, and I asked him for his county identification number and the name of his supervisor. He rattled off a number too fast, a string of digits that did not match the county's format, which I knew because I had pulled permits for 30 years and the county number always started with a year. I asked him to repeat it. He repeated a different number. I asked which department he reported to, and he said the building department, and I asked who the building official was by name, and he did not know it. I told him I would be calling the county right then to verify before he set one boot on my property. "That won't be necessary," he said, already backing toward his car. "I'll reschedule." He got in fast and pulled out, gravel spitting, and I stood at the gate and photographed his plate and the magnetic decal peeling at the corner of his door. I called the county building department that same afternoon, gave them the name off the badge and the plate number, and they confirmed they had sent no inspector to my address, had no such inspection scheduled, and that the man's name was not on their rolls. He was a fake, a costume and a laminated card. That was incident 3, and now I had what looked an awful lot like impersonation of a public official on film, which is a different animal entirely from a paint dispute. The folder said 3. Lena started keeping the camera by the door. She set up a second one in the greenhouse window facing the gate, and we ran both to a recorder that saved to a drive in the house and uploaded a copy to a cloud account in my name. My anger by then was a steady pressure behind my eyes, the way a bad tooth aches before it abscesses. But I did not let it move my hands. My hands kept filing. The fourth incident was the one that told me what this really was. A neighbor of mine, an older rancher named Earl who ran cattle on the lease behind the development, called me one evening while I was washing the supper dishes. He asked, in the roundabout way ranchers have, whether I had heard anything about the road. "What road?" I said, and I shut off the water. Earl told me that Vista Ridge Holdings had filed for a road extension and a rezoning, a plan to run a paved access road across the back of the old pasture to open up 40 new lots on land they had been quietly buying for 2 years. He had heard it at the feed store, where everything in that county gets heard first. "Thing is, Walt," he said, "the way they got it drawn, the road's got to run continuous frontage to get the county to bite. And there's one chunk in the middle of it breaks the line. Deeded access, old parcel, won't assemble." He let that sit. "I believe that's yours." I stood there with a dish towel in my hand, The whole thing turned over in my head and landed face up. Diane did not hate my door. She did not care about pewter mist or community standards or the tone my house set from the road. She needed my land, or she needed me gone. Frustrated, fined, harassed into selling cheap so the continuous frontage would close and the rezoning would sail through and her husband's 40 lots would pencil out. The blazer and the clipboard were the costume. The road was the motive. I thanked Earl, and I dried my hands, and I went and added a line to the Vista Ridge folder. And then I sat down because my legs wanted me to. I called the county planning office the next morning and requested the full application file for the Vista Ridge rezoning under the Open Records law. It took 2 weeks and a small copying fee. And when the box arrived, I read every page at my kitchen table while Lena did her homework across from me. The two of us under the same lamp. The application showed the proposed road, the 40 new lots, and a frontage map that simply erased my parcel. Drew the road straight through as if my land were already part of the assemblage, as if the deed in my cabinet did not exist. It listed Greg Vasquez as principal and Diane Vasquez as an officer of the holding company. The petty queen of paint colors and her developer husband were the same operation, 2 hands of the same reach. I added the whole box to the Vista Ridge folder. And that night, I sat on the porch a long while in the dark, listening to Earl's cattle somewhere out past the fence line, thinking about how a person can paint a word on your door and never once understand that the word was never really about the door. I should tell you about the deputy, because he matters. His name was Ray Okafor, a sheriff's deputy who had grown up 2 roads over and bought paint from me for his own house years back, a gallon of porch gray and a quart of trim white. I still had the ticket for somewhere. When I filed the report on the fake inspector, Ray was the one who took it. He sat at my kitchen table and read my timeline, page by page, looked at the photographs of the plate and the peeling decal, and then he set the folder down and rubbed the back of his neck. "Walt," he said, "I'm going to tell you how this works, because most folks fight it the wrong way. A complaint gets filed. We have to act on it, merit or no merit. The system runs on paper. Somebody calls in a code violation, we roll, even if it's nonsense, because the paper says we have to." He tapped my folder. "The way you beat somebody who weaponizes paper is you have more of it than they do. Cleaner, older. You don't yell, you don't swing, you file. You get to where it's a pattern a prosecutor can't wave off as a neighbor squabble. The impersonation thing, that one's real. That one holds if you've got the plate and the county's denial in writing. Get the county to put the denial on letterhead." He told me to keep documenting, to keep building, that he could not make an arrest on a bad feeling, but he could on a stack of dated incidents and a sworn pattern. He was not on my side because he liked me, though I think he did. He was on the side of the facts, and he was waiting, the same as I was, for enough of them to add up to something a court could not ignore. Before he left, he looked at the plywood where the door used to be, and he did not say anything about it, which was its own kind of saying something. The 5th incident hit my livelihood. I still consulted for 2 builders who bought through the distribution arm, color matching and spec work, the kind of thing a man does in semi-retirement to stay in the game. Within a single week, that spring both of them called to say they were pausing their orders. The first one was vague, said things were slow, said he would circle back. The second one I had known 20 years, and when I pushed him, he went quiet. And then he told me straight, "Walt, I'm not going to lie to you. I got a call. Somebody off the HOA board out there at Stone Ridge. Said you were under investigation for code violations, said there was talk of fraud, said doing business with you was a reputational risk for me right now." He paused. I told them I'd known you 20 years. You know how it is, though. I can't have my name in something. I'm sorry. Diane had reached past the door and put her hand on my income. And she had done it with a phone call and a rumor, the cheapest weapons there are. I wrote down the date, the builder's name, the substance of the call as he had told it to me. Incident 5. The folder was getting thick, the cardboard corners going soft from handling, and the legal jeopardy on the other side of it was getting thicker too. Though Diane could not see the scale tipping because she never once stopped to read what was piling up against her. She thought she was winning because I was quiet. Quiet is not the same as losing. I have spent my whole life teaching people the difference, mostly by example. The 6th incident is the one I will carry. It was a Thursday in May, and I was 40 minutes away at the warehouse when my phone rang, and it was Lena. And her voice was wrong, too fast, the words coming in pieces. Dad, there are men. At the gate, they have a saw. I told her to lock the doors, go to the back of the house, stay on the phone. I could hear her breathing. I could hear, faint, the whine of a cutoff saw somewhere out near the road. I drove home doing things to that truck I will not describe. And the whole way I kept her on the line, telling her to keep low, keep filming from the window, do not go outside no matter what, do not go outside. When I came up the county road, I saw a flatbed and 3 men, and they had cut the chain on my gate and were standing in my driveway, and one of them had a can of that same gray paint and was crossing out the iron numbers Rosa had hung by the door. I put the truck across the driveway so the flatbed could not leave, and I got out with my phone up and I told them, level, that they were trespassing on private property and that the sheriff was already coming because Lena, 16 years old and steadier than any of them, had called 911 before she called me. The men got loud. I did not. I stood between them and my front door, and I named the camera in the window and the camera on the eave, and told them every second was recording to 2 places they could not reach. Ray Okafor's cruiser came up the road 4 minutes later with its lights going, and a second one behind it, and the men suddenly remembered they were just hired help with a work order from a property company. The work order had the Clean Line name on it. Clean Line bought its paint from me. Nobody was hurt. I need you to hear that. Because in this story, the child is safe. She stayed safe. She did exactly right, and she never once went out that door. That was the night, though, that the thing crossed a line it could not uncross. Cutting a chain is destruction of property. 3 men on a deeded parcel after a 911 call is more than a paint dispute. Ray took statements, photographed the cut chain and the defaced numbers, collected the work order. And when he asked me if I had documentation of the prior incidents, I handed him a folder 2 inches thick, indexed, dated, with the video timestamps written on the tab. He looked at it for a long moment and he said, quiet, that this was the cleanest complaint file he had ever been handed by a private citizen. The tally in the folder was 6. What Diane still did not know, what none of them had bothered to check, was where the paint came from. Every bucket of pewter mist that Clean Line had used to deface my door, my numbers, and the fences of 3 other neighbors who had crossed her, had been purchased on a contractor account that ran through my distribution arm, billed to a builder code registered to her husband's holding company. The paper trail of her own harassment ran straight through my warehouse, with my signature on the supply agreement and 3 years of invoices in my own filing system. She had been buying the weapon from the man she was trying to drive off his land, and she had never once looked at the invoice. I did not spring it in a driveway. That is not how this works, and it is not how Rosa raised either of us to do things. I took it to the county. I made an appointment with the Planning Commission because the Vista Ridge rezoning was scheduled for a public hearing in June, and a rezoning hearing is a public record, on the record, in front of neutral officials whose entire job is to weigh facts. I brought both folders. I brought certified copies of my deed and the recorded plat showing my parcel was never part of the subdivision. I brought the open records file showing the proposed road that erased my land. And I brought the purchasing records, the supply agreement, and the 3 years of invoices showing that Clean Line Property Services, the company that had cut my chain and painted my wife's door, was a vendor of Vista Ridge Holdings, paid through the same builder code, using paint bought from a distribution company in which I held a documented ownership stake. The hearing room was full. Folding chairs all the way to the back wall, neighbors I had not spoken to in years, Earl the rancher in his good hat, and Lena beside me in the second row in the blouse her mother had bought her, sitting straight the way Rosa sat. Diane sat at the applicant's table in a magenta blazer, and Greg next to her in a sport coat that did not quite close, and their lawyer beside him with a leather folio. When the chair called the public comment portion and my name, I walked to the podium, and I did not make a speech. I have watched men lose by making speeches. The speech gives the other side something to argue with. A document gives them nothing to argue with at all. I laid the papers on the podium one at a time, and I asked the clerk to enter each into the record. And I let the chair of the commission read them rather than talking over the reading. "This is the recorded plat," I said. "My parcel is not a lot in this subdivision. It carries its own legal description and predates the plat by 10 years. This is my deed, recorded in 1994, with separate access. This is the rezoning application before you tonight, which draws a public road across my private land without my consent and erases my parcel from its own frontage map." Then I set down the last stack, and I kept my voice level, the way Ray had, the way Rosa would have. "This," I said, "the commission should see last. These are the purchasing records of Clean Line Property Services, the company that entered my property, cut the chain on my gate, and was filmed defacing my home in incidents now under active sheriff's investigation. This company is a paid vendor of the applicant before you, Vista Ridge Holdings. It is billed to the applicant's own builder code, and the paint that company used to deface my late wife's door and my neighbor's fences was supplied, on the record, by a distribution company in which I hold a documented ownership stake. The campaign against the one parcel blocking this road was run with materials bought, invoice by invoice, through the applicant's own accounts. The room went quiet in a way a full room rarely does. No shifting, no whispering. The chair of the commission turned the invoices face up, one after another, then laid them beside the rezoning map and looked between the two for what felt like a long time. He looked up at the applicant's table. He asked one question, and only one. He asked whether the applicant wished to disclose, for the record, the nature of its relationship with Clean Line Property Services. The lawyer leaned to whisper to Greg. Greg's face had gone the gray of his own pewter mist. And Diane, for the first time since she had stood on my steps in March with her clipboard against her hip and Friday in her mouth, had nothing to say at all. Her mouth opened and shut. The clipboard does not work in a room where the documents are older and cleaner than you are. I stood at the podium one more moment in the silence, not to savor it, just to let the record breathe. And then I gathered my folders, and I sat back down next to my daughter. I will give you the paired numbers, because they are the whole point. My deed was recorded in 1994, separate and clear, and in 31 years I had never been found in violation of anything by any authority with jurisdiction over my land. 0. Against that, the commission now had 6 documented incidents of harassment. 1 count of impersonating a public official, 1 cut chain, and a vendor relationship that turned a rezoning application into the centerpiece of a fraud and harassment referral. The road needed my 40 feet of frontage. The fraud referral cost them the road. It did not happen all at once, because real consequences rarely do. The Planning Commission tabled the rezoning that night and never brought it back onto a calendar. The county opened an inquiry into the Vista Ridge application after the relationship with Clean Line became part of the public record. And an inquiry is a slow, grinding thing that does not care how nice your blazer is. The sheriff's investigation into the cut chain and the fake inspector moved forward on the strength of my file, and the impersonation charge stuck because the county's denial was on letterhead, just like Ray told me to get it. Greg's holding company, which had borrowed against the assumption that the road and the 40 lots were coming, found its financing pulled the moment the rezoning died, because a bank will lend against a sure thing and run from a referral. Vista Ridge Holdings went into a quiet, ugly unwinding that took the better part of a year. Diane resigned the HOA presidency before the next annual meeting. She did not jump so much as get pushed, because 3 of the neighbors' Clean Line had also harassed. 2 over fence colors and 1 over a flag came forward once they saw me stand up at that podium and not get struck down for it. Courage is contagious that way. It only takes one person to read the deed out loud. The board that had rubber-stamped Diane for 6 straight years suddenly remembered it had bylaws and a quorum, and the power to ask for her resignation, and they used all 3. She lost the thing she had built her whole little kingdom on. She lost her authority, and her husband lost the road. And the road was the only reason any of it had ever happened. The paint on my door had been a small cruelty in service of a large greed, and the large greed was what brought the whole thing down on their heads. The barn red door went back on its hinges in July. I had it stripped and refinished by a man 2 towns over who did not ask questions, the same red, mixed to match a chip Rosa had taped inside the hall closet years before because she always thought ahead. Lena helped me hang it. We put the iron numbers back, the ones Rosa had chosen, cleaned of the gray. The day we set it, Lena stood in the driveway where she had stood in March with her backpack on her shoulder. And this time, she was not still and silent. She told me the door looked right again. She was safe. She was proud. And she had learned something I could not have taught her any other way, which is that you do not have to raise your voice if you keep your records. That was Rosa's lesson, really. I just kept it. So here is what I want you to take from this, plainly, because I promised you a lesson and I keep my promises. If a board, an association, or any clipboard authority tells you that you are in violation, the first thing you do is not argue and it is not pay. The first thing you do is find out whether they have jurisdiction at all. Pull your deed. Pull the recorded plat. Read the covenants and find the legal description and see whether your land is actually inside their lines. Because very often it is not. And they are counting on you never checking. File a public records request for anything that touches your property. A rezoning, a road, an easement. Because the motive is almost always in the paperwork if you are willing to read it. Keep a folder. Date everything. Back your video up to 2 places. Be polite, be patient, and be boring. Because boring documentation beats a loud blazer every single time. And know what you own, all the way down. Because sometimes the people coming for your home are buying the brush from your own shelf. If you have a story like this, a fight with a board or an officer or neighbor who forgot to check the deed, put it in the comments. Because I read them, and so do a lot of folks who are in the middle of their own fight right now and need to know they are not crazy. Or subscribe if you want more of these, because there are more. And the next one is about a retired land surveyor whose HOA tried to move a fence line 18 inches a year until the day he set up his own equipment on the property corner and invited the whole board to watch. Until then, keep your folder close and keep your door the color she painted it. I am Walter Boone. Take care of your records, and they will take care of you.